Part 1. The wedding that should never HPPM. The letter arrived on a morning that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it brought terror. Miss Eleanor Grant sat alone at the small escritoire by the window of her bedroom. The pale winter light falling softly across the ivory paper she held in trembling fingers. Outside, the grounds of Ashcroft Manor lay dusted with frost, the bare branches of ancient oaks etched against a gray English sky. In less than 48 hours, those grounds would be alive with guests, laughter, music, and celebration. In less than 48 hours, Eleanor Grant was to be married, and yet, as she read the words once more, she felt certain of only one thing: there would be no wedding. The letter was brief, written in a neat, deliberate hand. Too neat, she thought. Too careful. If you wish your wedding to proceed, you will do exactly as instructed. If not, the past will be revealed to your fiancé, to your family, and to the world. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. There was no signature. There did not need to be. Eleanor let the paper fall onto the desk and pressed her hands against her face, willing herself not to cry. Tears would solve nothing. Panic would solve nothing. What she needed, what she desperately needed, was time, and perhaps a miracle. Ashcroft Manor had stood for generations, a broad, dignified house of pale stone nestled among rolling countryside. It had witnessed wars, scandals, fortunes won and lost. Yet never, Lady Margaret Grant thought, had it felt so heavy with unease. Lady Margaret, Eleanor's aunt and guardian, paused at the foot of the staircase and listened. Silence. Too much silence for a house meant to be preparing for a wedding. The florist had been dismissed early. The seamstress had departed in a state of confusion. Even the servants moved about quietly, exchanging worried glances. Something was wrong. Lady Margaret ascended the stairs with purpose and knocked on Eleanor's door. "Eleanor, my dear?" "It's your aunt." No answer. She tried the handle. The door was unlocked. Eleanor stood by the window now, staring out at the frozen garden as though she expected something dreadful to emerge from the trees. "Eleanor," Lady Margaret said gently, closing the door behind her. "You sent for me?" Eleanor turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with fear. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered, "we must stop the wedding." Lady Margaret stared at her in disbelief. "Stop the wedding? My dear child, what nonsense is this?" "I cannot marry Thomas," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I cannot. Has he done something?" Lady Margaret demanded. "Has there been a quarrel?" "No, it is not Thomas." Eleanor hesitated, then shook her head. "I cannot explain. But please trust me. We must cancel everything at once." Lady Margaret crossed the room and took Eleanor firmly by the shoulders. "Eleanor Grant, you are exhausted and overwrought. Weddings do that to young women. Now sit down and tell me what has frightened you so." For a moment, Eleanor looked as though she might refuse. Then her strength seemed to desert her. She sank into the chair and covered her face. "There is something in my past," she said faintly. "Something I thought was gone forever. Someone knows." Lady Margaret's expression hardened. "Someone is threatening you?" Eleanor nodded. "Blackmail," Lady Margaret said quietly. "Yes." Lady Margaret straightened at once. "Then we shall deal with it properly. We shall go to the police." "No!" Eleanor cried, leaping to her feet. "You must not. If the police become involved, everything will be destroyed." Lady Margaret studied her niece carefully. "What is it they threaten to reveal?" Eleanor's lips trembled. "I cannot say." Lady Margaret sighed. "Then you leave me little choice, my dear. What do you mean?" "I mean," said Lady Margaret, "that we shall seek the assistance of someone who understands secrets and how to dismantle them." Hercule Poirot was enjoying his breakfast. This was, to his mind, an achievement worthy of appreciation. The eggs were cooked precisely to his liking. The toast was golden and symmetrical. The marmalade was evenly spread. Most importantly, the dining room of this small London hotel was quiet, orderly, and free of interruptions. He lifted his teacup with satisfaction. Then the interruption arrived. "Mr. Poirot?" Poirot looked up with mild irritation. A young man stood uncertainly at the table, holding a card. "Yes?" "A lady wishes to see you. She says it is urgent." Poirot accepted the card and read the name. Lady Margaret Grant. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Very well," he said. "Show her in." Lady Margaret entered briskly, her posture erect, her expression controlled but not calm. Poirot noticed at once the tension in her hands, the tightness around her mouth. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "my niece is in grave danger." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "You have my attention, madame." Lady Margaret explained the situation succinctly. The wedding, the threats, Eleanor's terror, her refusal to involve the authorities. Poirot listened without interruption. His eyes half closed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And the letter?" he asked. "It was delivered yesterday morning. May I see it?" Lady Margaret hesitated. Eleanor did not wish. Poirot held up a hand. "Madame, I cannot protect what I cannot understand." Lady Margaret nodded reluctantly. "I shall bring it to you. But will you come to Ashcroft Manor?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I think, madame, that I must." Eleanor Grant did not expect Poirot to look as he did. She had imagined someone stern, perhaps intimidating. Instead, she saw a small man with a magnificent mustache. Impeccably dressed, his manner polite and almost soothing. Yet when he looked at her, she felt exposed. "My dear mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you are very frightened." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, "and you are being forced toward a decision you do not wish to make." She nodded. Poirot seated himself opposite her. "Then let us speak frankly. The blackmailer, what do they want?" "Money," Eleanor said. "And silence. And if you refuse?" "They will destroy me." Poirot leaned forward. "Mademoiselle, blackmail thrives on fear. If we remove the fear, the power is lost." "You do not understand," Eleanor said desperately. "If what they know is revealed, I shall lose everything, my fiancé, my name, my future." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but perhaps not. Truth is a curious thing. It does not always wound as deeply as lies." Eleanor shook her head. "I cannot take that risk." Poirot sighed softly. "Then we shall proceed another way. Tell me, who knows of this secret?" "No one. Or so I believed." "Then someone has discovered it recently. That narrows our field." Eleanor looked up sharply. "You believe the blackmailer is close?" Poirot smiled without warmth. "In my experience, mademoiselle, the most dangerous threats come not from strangers, but from those who already stand near." A chill passed through the room. Outside, the bells of a distant church began to ring the hour. The wedding preparations continued, but for Eleanor Grant, the ceremony already felt like a funeral procession slowly drawing near, and Hercule Poirot, quietly observing, knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was a wedding that should never happen unless the truth was uncovered first. Part 2. The First Hercule. Poirot believed deeply in first impressions, not because they were always correct, but because they were always revealing. Ashcroft Manor presented itself as a house preparing for celebration. Yet to Poirot's finely tuned senses, it was a house holding its breath. The flowers arranged in the hall were fresh, but the servants moved with unnatural quiet. The carpets were brushed, the silver polished. Yet there was a tension in the air that no amount of refinement could conceal. Poirot paused just inside the entrance hall and adjusted his gloves. "A house," he murmured softly, "reflects the emotions of those who live within it." Lady Margaret, walking beside him, glanced sharply at his face. And what does this house reflect, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot looked toward the staircase, where Eleanor Grant stood motionless, her hands clasped tightly before her. Fear, he said. Fear, and something more. They approached her together. Eleanor attempted a smile, but it faltered almost immediately. You have come, she said. Yes, mademoiselle, Poirot replied kindly. And now, if you please, you will show me the letter. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. In the morning room. The morning room overlooked the frost-silvered gardens. A fire burned low in the grate, casting long shadows across the walls. Eleanor retrieved the letter from a small locked drawer and placed it before Poirot, as though it might bite. Poirot did not touch it at once. He studied the paper where it lay. Tell me, he said gently. When you first read this letter, what did you feel? Eleanor swallowed. Terror. And after? Shame. Poirot nodded. Very natural. He finally lifted the letter with 2 fingers, as delicately as a surgeon handling a blade. The paper was of good quality. The ink black and steady. The handwriting precise to precise. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. This was written by someone educated, he said. Someone careful. Someone who takes pleasure in control. Lady Margaret frowned. You can tell all that from a letter? Poirot smiled faintly. From many letters, madame. This one is only. Honest. He read the words once, then again. There is no signature, he observed. But there is confidence. This person does not fear discovery. Eleanor clasped her hands together. They know I will obey. Poirot placed the letter back on the table. Not necessarily. Eleanor looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, Poirot said calmly, that blackmailers often overestimate their power, especially when their victim has allies. Her eyes filled with tears. I cannot risk it, Monsieur Poirot. If Thomas learns the truth— Ah, Poirot interrupted softly. Thomas. Lady Margaret straightened. Yes, my niece's fiancé Thomas Ashburn. Poirot inclined his head. I should like to meet him. Eleanor stiffened. No. Poirot regarded her steadily. Mademoiselle, I understand your fear. But secrets are already moving through this house. If we do not bring them into the light, they will grow. After a long pause, Eleanor nodded. Very well. Thomas Ashburn proved to be exactly what Poirot expected and exactly what he did not. He was tall, well-spoken, handsome in a restrained English way. His manners were impeccable, his concern for Eleanor obvious, too obvious. Poirot thought. You are worried, Thomas said, leaning forward anxiously. Margaret tells me Eleanor has been unwell. Poirot watched him closely. The man's eyes flicked, ever so briefly, toward Eleanor before returning to Lady Margaret. Yes, Eleanor said softly. Just nerves. Poirot smiled. Wedding nerves are common, monsieur. But blackmail less so. The word fell into the room like a dropped plate. Thomas went very still. Blackmail? He repeated. What nonsense is this? Poirot tilted his head. Is it nonsense? Thomas's face flushed. If someone is threatening Eleanor, then they will answer for it, will they? Poirot asked gently. Or will you prefer silence? Thomas hesitated only a fraction of a second, but Poirot saw it. I prefer Eleanor's safety, Thomas said carefully. Poirot nodded. A reasonable answer. Eleanor stared at Thomas, searching his face. You know nothing of this? He reached for her hand. Nothing. I swear it. Poirot allowed the moment to pass, then rose. Thank you, monsieur. I believe I have seen enough for now. That evening, Poirot requested a list. A list? Lady Margaret repeated. Of everyone who will be present in this house until the wedding, Poirot said. Family, servants, visitors, everyone. But that will take hours. Poirot smiled pleasantly. Then we must begin at once. As the list was prepared, Poirot walked the house. He noted the placement of rooms, the narrow servant corridors, the back staircases, the doors that creaked and those that did not. He spoke casually with the staff. Mrs. Hollis, the housekeeper, had worked at Ashcroft Manor for over 20 years. She's a sweet girl, Mrs. Hollis said of Eleanor. Always has been. Wouldn't harm a soul. And yet, Poirot murmured, someone believes she has something to hide. Mrs. Hollis stiffened. People always believe things, sir. Poirot smiled. Indeed. The second letter arrived just after dinner. It was delivered by hand. The footman brought it to Lady Margaret, his face pale. This was left at the servants' entrance, he said. No one saw who brought it. Poirot accepted the envelope at once. Eleanor stood frozen as he opened it. The message inside was shorter, sharper. You are taking too long. Tomorrow night after dusk. If you fail me, everything ends. This time. Something was enclosed. A photograph. Eleanor gasped and clutched the table for support. Poirot examined the photograph. Carefully. It showed a younger Eleanor, years younger, standing beside a man whose face had been scratched out with deliberate cruelty. Poirot looked at Eleanor. This man, who is he? Her lips trembled. Someone I once trusted. And the event? She closed her eyes. Something I once believed was forgiven. Poirot folded the photograph and placed it back inside the envelope. The blackmailer is no longer guessing, he said quietly. They have proof. Or they wish you to believe they do. Lady Margaret's voice shook with anger. This is monstrous. Poirot nodded. Yes, and also dangerous. Eleanor looked at him desperately. What am I to do? Poirot met her gaze. You will do nothing without me. Later that night, Poirot sat alone in the guest room provided for him. He arranged the two letters, side by side. He examined the envelopes, the paper, the ink. He smiled faintly. The first threat creates fear, he murmured. The second creates urgency. He leaned back, tapping his fingers together. The blackmailer is impatient. That is a mistake. A soft knock came at the door. Poirot opened it to find Thomas Ashburn standing there. I wish to speak with you privately, Thomas said. Poirot gestured him inside. Thomas's voice was low. I love Eleanor. Whatever mistake she made in the past, I am prepared to forgive it. Poirot studied him carefully. Are you prepared to hear it? Thomas hesitated. Poirot smiled sadly. Ah, there it is. Thomas stiffened. What are you implying? That love, Poirot said gently, is often tested not by what we say, but by what we fear to know. Thomas said nothing. After a moment, he turned and left. Poirot closed the door softly behind him, outside. The house settled into uneasy sleep. But Poirot did not sleep. The first threat had been delivered. The game had begun, and somewhere within Ashcroft Manor, the blackmailer was watching, waiting for Eleanor. Grant to break. Part 3. Poirot studies the bride. Hercule Poirot believed that truth was rarely hidden in words. It lived instead in pauses, in glances, in the things people avoided saying. The morning after the second letter arrived at Ashcroft Manor, gray and bitterly cold. Frost clung to the windows like delicate lace, mocking the bridal finery laid out in Eleanor Grant's room. The house stirred slowly, reluctantly, as though even the walls sensed that something was terribly amiss. Poirot was already awake. He sat at the small writing desk in his guest room, reviewing his observations with meticulous care. Every movement of the previous day replayed itself in his mind. The tightening of Eleanor's hands, the hesitation in Thomas Ashburn's voice, the rigid composure of Lady Margaret. Most of all, he considered Eleanor herself. Fear. Yes, but not only fear, there was guilt, and guilt, Poirot knew, was a far more dangerous companion. Eleanor did not eat breakfast. She sat in the morning room, staring into her untouched tea, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Poirot entered quietly and took the chair opposite her. "You did not sleep," he observed gently. She shook her head. "Every sound felt like a footstep outside my door." Poirot nodded. "That tells me something important." "What?" "That your blackmailer is close enough for you to fear them inside this house." Eleanor flinched. "Please don't say that." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Mademoiselle, I must ask you some questions. They will not be easy, but they are necessary." She took a slow breath. "Very well. First," Poirot said, "this photograph. How old were you when it was taken?" Eleanor's fingers curled tightly around the teacup. 19. "And the man?" She hesitated. "His name was Victor Halle." Poirot watched her face carefully. The name affected her deeply. "What was your relationship?" "He was kind. Or so I believed." Her voice wavered. "He helped me when I was alone. When my parents had died and I had nothing." "And you trusted him?" "Yes," Poirot nodded. "And that trust was betrayed?" "Yes, but not in the way most people assume," Poirot said softly. Eleanor looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "You are afraid not only of what others will think of you," Poirot continued, "but of what they will misunderstand." Tears welled in her eyes. "You make it sound so simple." Poirot shook his head. "It is never simple, but it is always human." Later that morning, Poirot requested Eleanor accompany him on a walk through the gardens. Lady Margaret protested. Eleanor was pale, weak, distressed, but Poirot was firm. "Air and movement are good for the mind," he said. "And I wish to observe, not interrogate." The gardens were silent beneath the winter sky. Their footsteps crunched softly on the frozen gravel. Poirot spoke casually. "Tell me, mademoiselle, has anyone behaved strangely since the engagement was announced?" Eleanor thought carefully. "Everyone was pleased. Or seemed to be." "Seemed," Poirot repeated. "Appearances can be deceiving." She stopped walking suddenly. "You believe someone here wants to stop the wedding?" Poirot met her gaze. "Do you?" Her lips parted, but she said nothing. That silence told Poirot more than words ever could. Inside the house, Thomas Ashburn paced the library. He had not slept either. Lady Margaret watched him from across the room, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You are restless," she said. Thomas forced a smile. "Concerned, rather. For Eleanor?" "Of course." Lady Margaret folded her hands. "Then you will forgive me for speaking plainly." Thomas stiffened. "Go on." "If there is something in Eleanor's past that troubles you," Lady Margaret said, "it would be better addressed openly than exploited by some cowardly blackmailer." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't care about her past." "Are you sure?" "Yes." Lady Margaret studied him carefully. "Then why do you look afraid?" He looked away. That afternoon, Poirot met privately with the household staff. One by one, they came into the small sitting room. Mrs. Hollis, the housekeeper, Mr. Barnes, the butler, Clara, Eleanor's maid, even the gardeners and footmen. Poirot asked simple questions. How long had they worked at Ashcroft Manor? Had they noticed anything unusual? Any strangers? Any letters delivered by hand? Most answered calmly. One did not. Clara's hands shook as she spoke. "I've done nothing wrong, sir," she said quickly. Poirot smiled kindly. "I did not say you had, mademoiselle." She flushed. "I only meant," Poirot leaned back. "Fear makes people defensive. It is quite natural." Clara swallowed. "Miss Eleanor has been different." "How so?" "She watches everyone, as though she expects betrayal." Poirot nodded. "Sometimes expectations invite reality." That evening, Eleanor received another message. This one was not a letter. It was a whisper. As she stood alone in the corridor, outside her room. A voice spoke from the shadows. "You are running out of time." She screamed out. The house erupted into chaos. Poirot arrived moments later, calm amid the panic. "Who was it?" he asked. Eleanor shook violently. "I don't know. I didn't see their face, but you recognize the voice?" She hesitated, just a second too long. "No," she said. Poirot noted the lie. Later, Eleanor sat wrapped in a shawl, trembling. Poirot spoke softly. "Mademoiselle, you are protecting someone." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want anyone else destroyed." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "And yet by protecting them, you destroy yourself." She covered her face. "You don't understand." Poirot sighed. "Then help me understand." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then in a broken whisper she said, "Victor Hawley is dead." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Dead?" "Yes, he died 3 years ago." "Then the man in the photograph cannot threaten me," she said bitterly. "Which means someone else knows what happened between us." Poirot leaned forward. "And what did happen?" Eleanor shook her head. "I cannot tell you." "Not yet." Poirot nodded slowly. "Very well. But know this, your blackmailer is not a ghost. It is someone who knows the truth of Victor Hale's death." Her breath caught. Poirot rose. "And now, mademoiselle, I believe it is time to stop observing and begin acting." That night, Poirot stood alone at the window of his room. Below him, Ashcroft Manor lay silent, somewhere within its walls. A secret was tightening its grip. Someone believed Eleanor Grant would break. They were mistaken, because Hercule Poirot had begun to understand not only who the bride was but what she was hiding, and that knowledge would soon change everything. Part 4. Secrets hidden behind. Silk and lace. Wedding gown lay across the bed like a thing abandoned. Ivory silk. Delicate lace, hand-stitched pearls, every inch of it represented hope, promise, and respectability. Yet to Eleanor Grant, it looked less like a symbol of love and more like a shroud. She stood over it, unmoving. Poirot watched her from the doorway. "You see it now not as it is," he said quietly, "but as what it demands of you." Eleanor turned slowly. "It demands a lie." Poirot nodded. "And lies, mademoiselle, are heavy garments. One grows tired of wearing them." She pressed her fingers into the silk. "If I tell the truth, everything collapses. Or," Poirot corrected gently, "it rearranges itself." She laughed bitterly. "You make it sound so elegant." Poirot smiled sadly. "Truth is rarely elegant, but it is efficient." Later that morning, Lady Margaret summoned a household seamstress to make final adjustments to the gown. Poirot observed from a chair by the fire, seemingly uninterested. In reality, his eyes missed nothing. The seamstress, Mrs. Llewellyn, spoke nervously. "Such fine stitching," she said. "Miss Eleanor must have been very happy choosing it." Eleanor said nothing. Poirot interjected casually. "You have worked here before, madame?" "Oh yes, sir. Years ago. For another young lady." "And did that wedding proceed?" Mrs. Llewellyn hesitated. "No, sir." Poirot's mustache twitched. "How interesting." Lady Margaret stiffened. "That is quite enough, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head politely, but the seed had been planted. That afternoon, Poirot asked Thomas Ashburn to walk with him. The two men moved to the long gallery, portraits watching silently from the walls. "You are a man of order," Poirot began. "I try to be. You value reputation." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I value decency." Poirot smiled faintly. Often the two are confused. Thomas stopped walking. "What are you implying?" Poirot met his gaze steadily. "That you are afraid of Eleanor's past, not because of what she did, but because of what others might say. That is not true." "Is it not?" Poirot asked softly. You said you were ready to forgive, but forgiveness requires knowledge. Thomas's voice dropped. Some truths should remain buried. Poirot nodded. Yes, particularly when they threaten the present. Thomas turned away. Poirot watched him go, thoughtful. Meanwhile, Eleanor's maid Clara struggled with her conscience. She hovered at the doorway of Eleanor's room, twisting her apron. Miss, she said hesitantly, there's something I ought to tell you. Eleanor looked up sharply. What is it? Clara swallowed. Someone's been asking questions. About you. About before you came to Ashcroft. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Who? Clara shook her head. I don't know. They paid me for information. I refused, but others might not. Eleanor sank onto the bed. How long has this been happening? Since the engagement announcement. Poirot, who had been standing just outside the room, stepped in. And now we see, he said calmly, how the blackmailer gathered their knowledge. Clara gasped. I didn't mean any harm. Poirot smiled kindly. Harm often comes from small betrayals, mademoiselle. That is why blackmail works. It grows from whispers. Eleanor looked at him desperately. You see? Everyone knows something. Poirot shook his head. No, everyone suspects something. That is worse. That evening, Poirot assembled the household in the drawing room. This caused immediate unease. My friends, he began pleasantly, I dislike drama. But I dislike secrets more. There was an uncomfortable shifting among the group. Poirot continued. Someone here has used fear as a weapon. Someone here believes silence is safer than truth. Thomas frowned. Lady Margaret stiffened. The servants avoided one another's eyes. Poirot raised a finger. Let me be clear, I am not yet accusing anyone. Yet his gaze lingered, deliberately, on three people. Thomas Ashburn, Clara the maid. And Lady Margaret herself. Lady Margaret's eyes flashed. This is absurd. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. But absurdity often hides guilt. Eleanor stared at her aunt, confused and frightened. Later, alone with Poirot, she whispered. You don't really believe my aunt, Poirot interrupted gently. I believe nothing without proof. But I observe everything. That night, Eleanor finally broke. She came to Poirot's room, her face drawn, her voice barely above a whisper. I will tell you, she said. But you must promise no police. Not yet. Poirot nodded solemnly. I promise only this, that I will seek justice, not spectacle. She sat, trembling. Victor Hawley loved me, she began. Or said he did. He was charming, persuasive. He made me feel safe when I had no one. Poirot listened without interruption. One night, she continued, we argued. He wanted money, inheritance money I did not yet possess. When I refused, he became cruel. Her voice cracked. He fell down the stairs. It was an accident. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Was it? I don't know, she whispered. I pushed him away. He lost his balance, and you did not report it. No, she sobbed. I was young, afraid. His death was ruled accidental. Poirot exhaled slowly. Then your secret, he said gently, is not murder but fear of judgment. She looked at him desperately. Is there a difference? Poirot nodded. In law, yes. In conscience sometimes. The following morning, Poirot received troubling news that Mrs. Hollis, the housekeeper, had discovered Victor Hale's name in old correspondence, stored in Lady Margaret's study. Lady Margaret denied knowing how it got there. Poirot smiled thinly. Then someone wishes us to believe you. Did. The tension in the house tightened. Further. Someone was framing someone else. And that meant only one thing. The blackmailer was no longer content with threats. They were preparing to strike. Poirot stood by the window, watching the sun dip behind Ashcroft Manor. Silk and lace, he murmured. Hide many things, but not for long. Part 5. A secret buried in the past, Poirot often reflected, was never truly buried. It merely waited. Ashcroft Manor woke beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver. The house felt altered, no longer merely tense but watchful, as though every corridor held its breath. Eleanor Grant sat by the fire, wrapped in a shawl she did not feel. She had spoken the truth at last. Yet, instead of relief, she felt only dread. Poirot stood opposite her, his expression thoughtful rather than condemning. "You did not kill Victor Hawley," he said calmly. "You pushed him away. He fell. That is tragedy, not crime." Eleanor shook her head. "The world would not see it that way." Poirot's eyes softened. "The world sees only what it is shown." She looked at him sharply. "You mean the blackmailer?" "Yes," Poirot said. "They are shaping the story." Lady Margaret was furious. She paced the drawing room, her composure finally fractured. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "Someone deliberately planted Victor Hale's name among my papers. That is an accusation." Poirot regarded her mildly. "Or a provocation. By whom?" Poirot spread his hands. "That is the question." Lady Margaret stopped pacing. "You think someone wants to destroy me?" Poirot tilted his head. "Do you have enemies, madame?" "Only those who envy stability." Poirot nodded. "Ah, stability. A very dangerous thing to threaten." Thomas Ashburn arrived shortly after. Summoned by Lady Margaret, he looked strained, pale beneath his careful manners. "This has gone too far," he said sharply. "I want the police called." Eleanor gasped. "No," Poirot raised a hand. "Not yet, monsieur." Thomas rounded on him. "You promised her safety." "I promised truth," Poirot corrected gently. "And truth requires patience." Thomas's voice hardened. "My fiancée is being terrorized." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you hesitate to learn why." Thomas looked away. Eleanor whispered, "If you knew everything, would you still marry me?" The silence that followed was devastating. Poirot observed it carefully. Some answers were louder when unspoken. That afternoon, Poirot requested access to old records. Records? Lady Margaret repeated. "Death certificates. Inquest reports. Anything relating to Victor Hawley." Lady Margaret hesitated. "Those are private." Poirot smiled politely. "So is blackmail." She relented. The papers revealed little. The death had indeed been ruled accidental. No charges, no suspicion. Yet Poirot frowned. "This was too easy," he murmured. "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. "Accidents leave disorder," Poirot replied. "This is tidy." Meanwhile, the servants whispered. Clara overheard Mrs. Hollis speaking sharply to the butler. "We shouldn't be digging up old ghosts," Mrs. Hollis hissed. "It never ends well." Clara stiffened. "You know something." Mrs. Hollis turned pale. "Mind your tongue, girl." But the seed of suspicion had already been planted. That evening, the third threat arrived. Not a letter. Packaged. It was delivered to Eleanor's room. Inside lay a folded newspaper, yellowed, brittle, with a circled article. "Local man dies in fall. Verdict." ACCID inscrawled across it in red ink were 3 words. "You pushed him," Eleanor screamed. Poirot arrived within moments. His expression hardened when he saw the message. "This," he said quietly, "changes things." Lady Margaret looked ill. "They are accusing her outright." "No," Poirot replied. "They are testing her." "Testing what?" "How far she will go to protect herself." Eleanor collapsed into a chair. "I can't endure this." Poirot knelt before her. "Yes, you can. Because now I see the truth clearly." She looked at him desperately. "Then tell me." Poirot's voice dropped. "The blackmailer is not seeking money alone. Then what? Control, Poirot said. And revenge. Later that night, Poirot walked the grounds alone. He replayed every movement, every conversation. Who benefited if Eleanor's reputation was destroyed? Who gained if the wedding failed? Who had access to old papers? Who knew the precise emotional pressure points? The answer was becoming uncomfortably clear. Inside the house, Thomas Ashburn confronted Lady Margaret. "You knew," he said coldly. "You knew something about Victor Halley." Lady Margaret stared at him. "I knew Eleanor was vulnerable. I knew she had suffered. Nothing more. You protected her." "Yes," Lady Margaret snapped. "Because someone had to." Thomas's voice was bitter. "And now we are all paying for it." Lady Margaret's eyes blazed. "Be careful, Thomas. You speak as though you regret this marriage." The silence that followed was deadly. Poirot summoned Eleanor privately. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you must do something brave." She laughed weakly. "Braver than this? You must refuse the blackmailer." Her eyes widened. "That will ruin me." "No," Poirot said softly. "It will reveal them." She shook her head. "They will expose everything." Poirot smiled faintly. "And in doing so, expose themselves." She stared at him. "You have a plan." "Yes," Poirot said. "And it requires bait." She swallowed hard. "Me, yes." After a long pause, Eleanor nodded. "Then let us end this," she said that the next morning. A notice was discreetly sent. The wedding would proceed as planned. The payment demanded by the blackmailer would not be made. Someone, somewhere within Ashcroft Manor, read that message and panicked. Poirot stood by the window, watching reactions ripple subtly through the house. A tightening jaw, averted eyes, a hand clenched too tightly. "Yes," Poirot murmured. "Now you are afraid." The secret buried in the past had been disturbed, and it was about to surface, with consequences no one could escape. Part 6. The blackmailer tightens the Anoo S.E. Hercule. Poirot had expected retaliation. What he had not expected was how swiftly it would come. Ashcroft Manor awoke to a sense of unease so sharp it felt almost physical. The servants spoke in whispers. Doors closed too carefully. Every glance lingered a fraction too long. Someone in the house knew. The rules had changed. Eleanor Grant felt it most of all. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the frost melt slowly under the pale morning sun. The announcement had been made. The wedding would go on. No money would be paid. She was no longer a victim hiding in fear. She was bait. Poirot joined her quietly. "You are afraid," he said. "Yes," Eleanor replied honestly. "But not in the same way." Poirot smiled faintly. "Good. Fear that sharpens the mind is useful." She turned to him. "And fear that drives people to desperation?" "That," Poirot said softly, "is what we are waiting for." The blackmailer did not wait long. Just after luncheon, Mrs. Hollis was found unconscious at the foot of the servants' staircase. The house erupted into chaos. Poirot arrived before the doctor, kneeling beside the fallen woman. He noted the position of her body, the angle of her fall, the faint smell of oil on the polished wood. "This was no accident," he murmured. Lady Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth. "She could have been killed." "Yes," Poirot said gravely. "That was the intention." Clara burst into tears. "She was going to tell you something. She said so this morning." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Tell me what?" "She said she knew who had been asking questions about Miss Eleanor years ago. She said she'd stayed silent too long." Poirot rose slowly. "The blackmailer tightens the noose," he said quietly, "and in doing so, reveals their hand." Mrs. Hollis survived, but only just. She lay pale and weak, watched constantly. Poirot spoke to her briefly while the doctor stepped away. "You were pushed?" Poirot asked gently. Mrs. Hollis's eyes flickered. "Yes. Did you see who did it?" No, but I knew them. Poirot nodded. That is enough for now. Lady Margaret trembled with fury. This has gone beyond blackmail. This is attempted murder. And now, Poirot said calmly, the police truly become a risk for the guilty. Thomas Ashburn reacted badly. This is madness, he snapped. Someone is trying to kill people in this house. Poirot studied him. Your concern is genuine. Thomas laughed bitterly. For Eleanor or for myself? Poirot raised an eyebrow. An interesting question, monsieur. Thomas clenched his fists. I never wanted this. Poirot tilted his head. You wanted the wedding. Yes, but not like this. Poirot leaned closer. And yet, if the wedding fails, you lose very little. Thomas stared at him. What are you suggesting? That motive, Poirot said gently, often hides behind respectability. Thomas stormed out. That night, Eleanor received another message, this time. It was placed on her pillow. A single line, written carefully. Next time. She dies. Eleanor did not scream. She went very still. Poirot read the note later. His expression cold. They are escalating, Eleanor whispered. They will kill for this. Yes, Poirot agreed. Which tells me something important. What? They are no longer confident. Poirot gathered Lady Margaret and Eleanor together. The danger is now immediate, he said. But so is the opportunity. Lady Margaret shook her head. I will not allow Eleanor to be used as bait again. Poirot met her gaze. Then someone else will suffer. Silence followed. Finally, Eleanor spoke. What do you need me to do? Poirot nodded approvingly. We shall arrange a meeting. A meeting? Lady Margaret echoed. Yes, Poirot said. With the blackmailer. Eleanor's breath caught. They would never agree. They already have, Poirot replied. They only do not know it yet. The plan was simple and dangerous. A message would be sent. Pretending Eleanor had broken, she would agree to meet the blackmailer alone that evening in the old rose pavilion at the edge of the grounds. Poirot would observe. So would others quietly. The blackmailer would come. They always did. As dusk fell. Ashcroft Manor held its breath once more. Eleanor walked slowly toward the pavilion. Her heart pounding, her step steady only through sheer will. Hidden among the trees. Poirot watched. He noted the shadows, the timing. The silence. Then a figure moved, not from the direction Eleanor expected, but from the house itself. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mon Dieu, he whispered. Of course. The figure stepped into the fading light, and Eleanor froze, back at the house. Lady Margaret felt a sudden chill. She turned sharply toward the window. At that exact moment, a scream cut through the night. Poirot was already running. Part 7, Lies Told on the Eve of Amarai, a G. Scream echoed across the frozen grounds of Ashcroft Manor like a crack in glass. Poirot reached the rose pavilion moments after Eleanor. She stood rigid, her face drained of all color. Staring at the figure before her. It was Thomas Ashburn. For a long, breathless second, no one spoke. Poirot felt it then, the unmistakable shift in the air, when suspicion sharpened into something far more dangerous. Thomas? Eleanor whispered. Why are you here? Thomas looked genuinely startled. I came because I was worried. You said you were meeting someone. Poirot stepped forward calmly. Indeed she was, monsieur. Thomas turned sharply. You think I'm the blackmailer? Poirot studied him carefully. I think you are lying. Thomas laughed, a short, brittle sound. This is absurd, is it? Poirot asked softly. You had access to the house, the letters, the knowledge of Eleanor's fear. You stood to lose the least if the wedding failed. Eleanor shook her head violently. No, he wouldn't. Poirot raised a hand. Mademoiselle, listen not with your heart, but with your mind. Thomas's jaw tightened. You are playing a dangerous game, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. Danger is unavoidable when truth is close. Before Poirot could continue, footsteps approached rapidly. Lady Margaret emerged from the shadows, her expression fierce. "What is going on?" she demanded. Poirot turned to her. "You came quickly." "Of course," she snapped. "I feared for Eleanor." Poirot's eyes flicked between the three of them. "Yes," he said quietly. "Fear motivates us all, does it not?" The tension shattered abruptly. A fourth figure bolted from the darkness. Poirot shouted, "Stop!" The figure ran. Poirot was faster than most expected. Within moments, he caught them at the edge of the trees. Gripping their arm firmly, it was Clara. The maid collapsed into sobs. "I didn't mean it to go this far," she cried. "I only wanted the money." Lady Margaret stared in shock. "You?" Clara sank to her knees. "They promised me protection, Victor's brother. He said Eleanor ruined everything. That she should pay." Poirot's eyes narrowed sharply. Victor Halley had no brother. Clara froze. Poirot's voice hardened. "You were used, mademoiselle." Clara sobbed harder. "Then who?" Poirot released her slowly. "The true blackmailer," he said quietly, "remains." Back inside the manor, the house seemed to exhale, but only briefly. Thomas paced furiously. "This is madness. Accusations, traps, this has gone far enough." Poirot watched him. "You are angry." "I am humiliated." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and afraid." Thomas spun on him. "Afraid of what?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "That the truth Eleanor hides is not the truth you fear." Silence fell. Eleanor whispered, "Thomas, if I tell you everything, will you stay?" Thomas did not answer immediately. Poirot observed the pause, the hesitation, the calculation, and there it was. Later that night, Poirot spoke privately with Eleanor. "You see now," he said gently, "why I studied you so carefully." She nodded. "Because my fear blinded me. And because love," Poirot added softly, "can become another form of pressure." Tears slid down her cheeks. "What if I lose him?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Then you lose a man who loved the idea of you, not the truth." Poirot returned to his room and laid out the evidence once more. The letters, the photograph, the planted documents, the push on the staircase, the fake brother. All roads converged, and all pointed inward, toward someone who knew the law, someone who understood scandal, someone who benefited from silence, someone who believed they were untouchable. Poirot straightened his tie. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "I will remove the mask." Downstairs, Eleanor stood alone beside the wedding dress. She touched the lace lightly. Tomorrow, she would either walk down the aisle or walk into ruin, and somewhere in Ashcroft Manor, the true blackmailer realized something terrifying. Hercule Poirot was no longer observing. He was concluding. Part 8. Poirot sets a clever. Hercule Poirot disliked weddings, not because he objected to love, on the contrary. He admired it greatly, but because weddings encouraged people to lie. They lied with smiles. They lied with flowers. They lied with vows spoken too quickly and secrets buried too deep. Ashcroft Manor glittered that morning. The guests arrived in polished motor cars. The hall filled with polite laughter, rustling silk, and the faint, hopeful sound of music being tuned. To any outsider, it was a house on the verge of joy. To Poirot, it was a stage. And the players had taken their positions. Eleanor. Grant sat before the mirror as Clara's replacement. Adjusted the veil. Her reflection looked calm. Too calm. "You are very brave today," Poirot said gently. Appearing behind her, she met his eyes in the mirror. "I feel as though I've already walked to the edge of something." Poirot nodded. Yes, but today you will not fall. She swallowed. You're certain? Poirot smiled faintly. I am certain that fear has changed sides. In the drawing room, Lady Margaret received guests with impeccable composure. Thomas Ashburn stood beside her. Flawless in appearance, rigid in posture, Poirot watched him carefully. Thomas was controlled, but control, Poirot knew, required effort. And effort betrayed strain. You look unwell, Poirot remarked casually. Thomas stiffened. A long night. Yes, Poirot agreed. For many of us. At precisely 11 o'clock, Poirot made his first move. He requested Lady Margaret, Thomas, and Eleanor join him briefly in the small morning room. Now? Lady Margaret protested. The ceremony will wait, Poirot said calmly. Truth does not keep to schedules. Thomas's jaw tightened. This is highly inappropriate. Poirot smiled. So is blackmail. The words silenced them. Poirot placed the letters on the table. One by one, he said. These were delivered. Threats, proof, escalation. He turned to Thomas. You recognize the handwriting. Thomas scoffed. You have no evidence. Poirot inclined his head. Not yet. He turned to Lady Margaret. You knew Eleanor's secret, but not its danger. Lady Margaret nodded. I sought to protect her. Poirot smiled kindly. Yes, and in doing so, you provided cover for someone else. Eleanor's breath caught. Who? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope. This, he said, was sent this morning. Thomas's face drained of color. Poirot opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence. If you speak today, she will pay. Poirot looked directly at Thomas. Interesting, he said softly, that the blackmailer still believes silence is possible. Thomas lost his temper. This is insane. He snapped. You're accusing me without proof. Poirot raised a finger. But proof is not always material. He turned to Eleanor. Mademoiselle, please tell us, did Victor Hawley ever threaten you with exposure? Yes, Eleanor said quietly. He said no one would ever believe me. Poirot nodded. And who repeated that fear to you later? Eleanor hesitated. Poirot's voice was gentle. Who warned you that society would destroy you? Eleanor's eyes widened slowly. She looked at Thomas. You, she whispered. Thomas laughed sharply. That proves nothing. Poirot smiled. On the contrary, it proves everything. Poirot turned to Lady Margaret, who handled the legal matters surrounding Victor Hale's death. Lady Margaret frowned. A young solicitor. Recommended by Thomas's family. Poirot nodded. And who ensured the inquest concluded swiftly? Thomas said nothing. Poirot continued calmly. And who benefits if Eleanor remains silent forever? Thomas exploded. Enough! He stood, knocking over a chair. You think I did this because of love? Because of reputation? Poirot's voice was steady. No, I think you did it because Eleanor knew. Something. Silence. Fell. Poirot leaned forward. She knew Victor Hawley was blackmailing you as well. Eleanor gasped. Thomas froze. Poirot spoke gently but mercilessly. Victor, Hawley discovered your financial irregularities. He threatened exposure. Eleanor's accident removed him, but the fear remained. Thomas's voice cracked. You can't prove that. Poirot smiled sadly. I don't need to. He gestured toward the door. It opened. Mrs. Hollis entered supported, pale, but alive. He came to me, she said weakly. Asked me to plant the papers. Said it was for Eleanor's own good. Thomas staggered back. Poirot straightened his tie. The trap, he said quietly, is complete. Thomas laughed once hollow, broken. You think this ends me? He said, There will be scandal. Poirot nodded. Yes, but not Eleanor's. Thomas looked at her, for the first time. He saw not fear but resolve. I would rather lose everything, Eleanor said, than live another moment in silence. Thomas turned away. Outside, the wedding bells began to ring. Inside, the truth stood naked and unavoidable. Poirot watched Thomas Ashburn escorted away. Justice, he murmured, does not require vows. Later, Eleanor stood in the now silent chapel. The dress lay folded beside her. Poirot approached gently. You are free, he said. She smiled, truly smiled for the first time. And tomorrow? Poirot bowed slightly. Tomorrow, mademoiselle. You begin honestly. Part 9. The blackmailer reveals Thomas left the drawing room at Ashcroft Manor had never held such silence. Moments ago, it had been filled with the polite murmurs of wedding guests. Now those same guests sat frozen ladies clutching gloves, gentlemen staring at the carpet, while the truth hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Thomas Ashburn stood. Alone. He no longer resembled the confident groom of that morning. His shoulders sagged, his expression brittle, as though every word spoken by Hercule Poirot had stripped something essential from him. Poirot stepped forward. Madame et messieurs, he said calmly, I regret that you have been drawn into this affair. But secrecy has been the weapon of injustice. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Lady Margaret rose slowly. Mr. Poirot, is this truly necessary? Poirot inclined his head. For Eleanor Grant, yes. He turned to the guests. You see before you a man of excellent reputation, Poirot continued. A man respected in business, admired in society. And yet, this man lived in terror. Thomas laughed bitterly. You make it sound dramatic. Poirot smiled faintly. Blackmail always is. Poirot began to walk slowly as he spoke, the way a conductor might guide an orchestra. Victor Halley, he said, was not merely a cruel suitor. He was a man who collected weaknesses. The guests exchanged glances. He discovered irregularities in Mr. Ashburn's financial dealings, investments made in Eleanor's name, funds transferred without consent. Eleanor gasped softly. Poirot nodded to her. You were used, mademoiselle. Your signature forged. Your trust exploited. Thomas clenched his fists. You have no documents. Poirot raised an eyebrow. On the contrary. Mrs. Hollis stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. Thomas's face drained of color. These papers, Poirot continued, were planted among Eleanor's belongings to suggest guilt. But the handwriting, was not hers. Poirot turned to the guests. A blackmailer does not seek truth. He seeks control. A woman near the fireplace spoke shakily. But what about Victor Hale's death? Poirot nodded. An accident, tragic, but genuine. Eleanor was innocent. He turned to Thomas. But you feared the truth would emerge. So you ensured silence. Thomas's voice cracked. I protected us. Poirot's expression hardened. No, he said quietly. You protected yourself. Poirot faced the room. The letters were composed with legal precision. The threats escalated logically. This was not the work of a servant or a grieving acquaintance. He looked directly at Thomas. It was the work of a man trained to manage risk. Thomas broke. Yes. He shouted. I was afraid. One word from Victor Halley would have ruined me. Poirot nodded. And when Victor died, Eleanor became the risk. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady. I would have trusted you, she said, if you had told me. Thomas looked at her, and for a moment, regret flickered. Then it was gone. Poirot folded his hands. The tragedy, he said softly, is not that the crime was clever. It is that it was unnecessary. He gestured toward the door. 2 officers entered. Thomas straightened his coat. You think this is justice? he said coldly. Poirot met his gaze. "No," he replied. "This is consequence." Thomas was led away. The guests departed quietly, their whispers low and stunned. Ashcroft Manor felt hollow like a house after a storm. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the last car leave. Poirot approached. "You were very brave," he said. She smiled faintly. "I was tired of being afraid." Lady Margaret joined them. "I failed her," she said quietly. Poirot shook his head. "You tried to protect her from pain. But pain cannot be avoided, only postponed." Later, Poirot sat alone in the library, reviewing his notes. Everything had unfolded as he predicted. And yet he frowned. One detail remained unsettled. Final letter, the one sent that morning. Poirot picked it up again. The wording was careful, controlled, but something about it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "This letter," he murmured, "was not written in desperation. It was written in confidence." He stood abruptly. "No," he said softly. "There is one truth still hidden." The door creaked open behind him. Poirot turned slowly. Someone stood there. Listening. Part 10. Poirot's final vergis. The library was dim, lit only by the low glow of the fire. The figure standing in the doorway did not move. Poirot regarded them calmly. "You may come in," he said. "I was expecting you." Lady Margaret stepped forward. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together. "I thought it was over," she said. Poirot nodded. "So did everyone else." She closed the door behind her. "You were not the blackmailer," Poirot said gently. "But you were not innocent either." Lady Margaret flinched. "I tried to protect Eleanor," she whispered. Poirot tilted his head. "Protection can become control when fear speaks louder than trust." She sank into a chair. "When Victor Hawley died," she said slowly, "I destroyed letters. Not to hide a crime, but to preserve a future." Poirot listened without interruption. "And when Thomas began his threats?" Poirot asked. "I said nothing," she admitted. "I believed silence was kinder." Poirot shook his head sadly. "Silence," he said, "is never kind. It is merely convenient." Poirot held up the final letter. "This," he said, "was dictated not by fear, but by certainty." Lady Margaret looked at it. "I advised him," she said quietly. "I told him what words would frighten Eleanor most." Poirot nodded. Double quotes yes. That is why the letter lacked anger. It contained strategy. Tears slid down Lady Margaret's cheeks. "I failed her." Poirot softened. "You failed honesty. But you did not fail love." The next morning was cold and brilliant. Ashcroft Manor felt lighter, as though a weight had lifted. Poirot stood in the garden as Eleanor approached. "You are leaving," she said. "Yes," Poirot smiled. "My work here is complete." She hesitated. "Lady Margaret told me everything." Poirot studied her, and Eleanor's voice was steady. "I forgive her." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Forgiveness is a form of strength." She smiled. "What will happen to Thomas?" Poirot adjusted his mustache. "He will face the law. But more importantly, he will face himself." Eleanor walked with Poirot to the gate. "I thought marriage would save me," she said softly. Poirot paused. "No," he said kindly. "Truth saved you." She laughed quietly. "And you?" Poirot bowed slightly. "None. I merely listened." As Poirot departed, he reflected on the case. There had been no murder to avenge, no blood on the floor. And yet, woman's life had been quietly stolen, restored not by force, but by courage. That evening, Eleanor stood alone in the chapel. She removed the veil from its box and laid it gently on the altar. Then she turned away, outside. The world waited. Poirot sat in the train compartment, watching the countryside slide past. He closed his eyes. "Order," he murmured, "is not the absence of crime, but the presence of truth. The train carried him onward, to another mystery, another silence waiting to be broken. The end.